living good back in the woods.
Afternoon, guys. Dave Conibear at the Pathfinder School. I wanted to have a discussion with you guys today about the difference between survivability and sustainability. And there's a big difference there. Most of what I teach in the videos that I do on the internet cover both aspects of both survivability and sustainability. I teach both in my classes, survivability and sustainability, here at the Pathfinder School. I live both survivability and sustainability by growing my own food, raising my own animals, feeding my family off of my farm, collecting things and hunting in the woods. That is long-term sustainability. And the difference between survivability or a 3-day scenario and sustainability really boils down to very few things. And if you understand what those few things are, then you understand what you need to put in your kit. Because that's a lot of the questions that I get is, if you had to survive more than 3 days, what would you put in your bag? If you're going out into the woods for 2 weeks, what would you put in your bag? Well, all of those things are dictated by lots of variables. They're dictated by weather. They're dictated by terrain. They're dictated by your current health level or physical condition and how much you can actually carry, how much you want to carry over distance, how far you're going to be traveling in that time period. All of those things dictate what you're going to carry. What's the local game animals that are available versus the wild edibles, versus is it easy to fish where you're going, or do you have to hunt for mammal type game? All of those things encompass the thought pattern that you have to go through when you're building a kit to go into the woods for a longer term situation of sustainability and not just survivability. Okay, so first let's step back for a minute in time and let's have a historical discussion again about peoples who lived along the frontier areas of what was then considered the West and is now considered the Eastern Woodlands. And let's talk a little bit about them because they experienced sustainability all of the time. And I'm not talking about the people who lived on homesteads necessarily. Obviously, they were practicing sustainable living. But the people who went out on treks to do explorations for purchases of land, to explore new areas that companies like the Virginia Company could acquire land, to do long hunts or game hunts for different companies and different trading companies. All of those peoples traveled over long distance. They had to be sustainable because they were going to be out there for a week, for a month, for half a year. They didn't know how long they were going to be there. They were there until it was time to come back, and many times they didn't even know how far or where exactly they were going. They didn't have maps per se that we have now. They didn't have accurate compasses to take bearings. They lived by their wits. They navigated by what was around them to get back to where they were before. And they understood those type things that we aren't very good at today. But at the same time, they explored a lot of new areas, so they didn't know exactly where they were all the time. You know, Daniel Boone was famous for saying that he'd never been lost. He'd been turned around a time or two, but he'd never been lost. Basically, he wasn't sure where he was going until he got there. The fact of the matter is that what these people all had in common was, and I've explained this about the 5 C's of survivability before, they had those 5 C's of survivability. They had their cutting tools, as we discussed in a video the other day. They had containers. They had combustion devices to make fire. They had cordages, and they had cover. Whether it was a wool blanket, whether it was a trail tarp of some kind that was oilskin, very similar to the one Steve Critter Davis showed you guys in a video recently, or whether they built a station camp, which was basically a 3-sided structure with an open front with a roof on it that either was made of cattail, was made of vegetation or skins to cover them, and that was their permanent base camp per se, and they went out from there on their hunts and things like that and then returned. But they may have been gone for a week at a time, so they still had to practice somewhat sustainability on their way. And this is where the adding what equipment comes in. And I think that we have to, number one, take lessons off of what they did and also take lessons off of what they had to deal with and what we can do better today. And that's what I like to do with history is take what's great and use it, take what's not so great and what we've learned and use that too to combine things to make it better, to make my survivability and my sustainability more accurate and easier to accomplish. So let's look at footwear to begin with. I think that the first thing you have to look at beyond your initial kit is clothing and footwear, especially footwear. Footwear is going to be the most important thing that you have because you're not going to be on horseback, you're going to be walking. And walking is an important element of this because I assume when people ask me these questions, they're not saying, what would you put in your big green Jeep? What would you put on the back of your ATV? What can I throw on my horse? It's what can I throw on my back? Which means you're going to be walking and carrying these things. So footwear is a big concern. Now, in the days of the frontier, most of the time they wore moccasins, but they complained about them every day. In historical journals and historical writings, they say that every woodsman had a moccasin awl attached to his shooting bag, and the nightly chore before bed was to repair or remake their moccasins, and that moccasins were only a civilized way of going barefoot, and they hated them. All the hunters had to sleep with their feet toward the fire to keep from getting rheumatism and joint problems and all those things associated with not wearing proper footwear. They couldn't wear French or English made boots because the soles were all slick. They didn't have any tread on them, so they weren't quiet. They were not very good at climbing hills and things of that nature that you get with a barefoot type grip that you get in moccasins. But moccasins were miserable for them, but they had nothing better. They had nothing better. Today, we have lots of things that are better. We can buy quality footwear that's made for the seasonality that we're choosing, that's made for the environment we're choosing, and that's very durable. We just have to find what footwear that is. Then, you got to look at your clothes. How fast are you going to tear those clothes up? Do you have an extra pair of pants? Do you have an extra piece of outerwear? Are you going to tear this stuff up? Are you going to be in an environment where you're prone to tear this stuff up? Are you going to be in an environment where you're going to be wet all the time and you need to make sure that if you can't cover your body and you're going to get wet no matter what you do, can you dry one set of clothes out while you're wearing the other set? All of those things are important to understand. And once you go beyond the clothing part of it, sustaining your body's core temperature through the microclimate of your clothing, including your footwear, your hat, then you need to think about exactly what they thought about. And if you look at the ledgers that I've read in past diaries of the TP, once you get beyond the 5 C's of survivability, which they all carried with them, the next most important thing to them was a way to secure game, a way to secure meat. It's not hard to understand edible plants, but you're not going to live off them sustainably long term. You're going to have to be able to secure meat, and that's important. So the first thing that those people would buy was some type of firearm. Some of the earlier Native Americans, before they were introduced to the firearm, carried bows and arrows. Bows and arrows are a very viable option today as well, but they're not as accurate over long distance. You're not going to get the easy shot most of the time that you're going to get with a firearm. So those type things, a weapon that you're going to secure meat with is very important. And it's very important to have multiples or backups. 2 is 1, 1 is none. Rule of threes. I need 3 cutting tools. Maybe I need 3 ways to secure game. Well, my first way to secure game is my 12 gauge shotgun. My second way to secure game is a simple slingshot. And then maybe my third way to secure game is some kind of traps. Not primitive traps with sticks and strings, but mechanical traps, because mechanical traps were something they bought very often. Again, they oftentimes had horses to carry this stuff, but you can put, and we'll talk about in a minute, you can put enough trapping implements in your kit that don't weigh a whole lot to really make it easier for you to secure game and be much more guaranteed to secure game with just 4 simple items that I'm going to show you in just a minute, above and beyond a firearm or a bow. Okay, so real quick, let's discuss the things that you can add to your pack that don't take up a lot of room, don't take a lot of weight, but will make it much easier for you to secure game beyond your firearm or your bow. Firearms and bows are probably the most popular items that you would carry, and every woodsman carried a gun. There's no question about it. They all had a flintlock smoothbore rifle with them all the time, and that follows through all the way through history when they started making cap locks to the shotgun. You know, every woodsman and frontiersman carried a firearm with them. That was their way of securing meat. To me, the shotgun is the most versatile, followed by the flintlock. 12 gauge is where I'd want to go first, and I would go from there, depending on how long I was going to be gone. Weight of ammunition can be a concern, but for sheer stopping power and sure killing game, give me a 12 gauge every day. Now, let's talk about beyond that, okay? The pocket hunting system, a slingshot. Very, very adaptable weapon, very easy to become accurate with, very good for killing small game. Ammunition is free. All you have to do is pick up rocks. If you wanted to carry ball bearings, or you're already carrying something that was large shot, like buckshot or some kind of 50 caliber ammunition in a ball form, or 45, something like that, it could be shot out of this. The other advantage to having this bow adapter on there that we use on the pocket hunting system is it can be removed to shoot it as a slingshot. But if I've got a bow as my primary weapon and I damage that bow, whether it be a traditional bow or a compound bow, I can shoot either wooden arrows, carbon arrows, or aluminum arrows with this arrow rest. That gives me the advantage of being able to utilize my ammunition even though I've damaged my primary weapon. And that's a big thing, especially if you're a bow hunter. Doesn't take up a lot of room. It's got plenty of power with the black bands on it. It's 42 pounds at 28 inches. We're investigating some bands now that I looked at last weekend that are 55 pounds at 28 inches. A fishing kit is an option if you're going to be anywhere that there's going to be fish, and that's as simple as either a pocket fishing kit if you want to go that route, or if you're already carrying your bank line with you, all you have to do is throw a little box of hooks in your stuff and maybe a couple sinkers, or just the hooks. You can make sinkers out of rocks or anything else, and then you have the ability to fish. And recreating the hooks is the hard part. And that goes back to what's going to take a lot of time and energy to recreate versus what can I carry that doesn't weigh a whole lot that affords me a lot of options. With the sling bow system or the pocket hunting system like this one, it gives you the option to shoot arrows. It would take a long time to carve something that you could shoot arrows out of if you're going to make a slingshot out of wood. Doesn't take very long to make the slingshot portion, but to make something that will shoot arrows would take considerably longer and be more detailed. So to carry a slingshot or to carry a pocket hunter would not be a bad option. The next thing I would probably think about would be a frog gig, a pre-made frog gig. This is a 4-tine B&M gig. Doesn't weigh anything. I've got a leather pouch for it here that slides into. I can put that in the pack. But I don't have to carve this now. I don't have to take a chance on breaking it now. I don't have to worry about fire hardening it now. It's very strong. It could be used on small game as well. If I had something in a trap that wasn't dead yet that I wanted dead, like a raccoon or something like that, then I could potentially stake it to the ground with this to hold it down or kill it. I can also use this for snakes and things like that if I want to, as well as frogs and fish. So it's a very good adaptable item for hunting that all I need is a stick for. Doesn't weigh very much to put in my pack. Then I would probably carry 2 selections of traps. I would have some snares like these, and there's a dozen snares right here, and I can guarantee you that weighs less than 1.5 pounds for a dozen snares. Cable snares are always going to be more beneficial to you than trying to make primitive snares out of line. These things are never going to be chewed through. They're not going to give it all. They're going to be useful for other things as well, because you can use them for bindings or what have you, for different types of traps. You can use them to stake out other traps if you need to, like Conibears, things like that. So they're a very useful item to have, and they don't take up a lot of room. The next one would be the 110 Conibear, and I've got 3 of them stacked up here. And it doesn't take up, this system of 12 snares and 3 Conibears doesn't take up very much room. I mean, that package is probably 6 inches by 6 inches by 3 or 4 inches high, and I've got 12 snares and 3 Conibears. The 110 Conibear, as we've talked about before, is bulletproof. If you've got 3 of these in your pack and nothing else, you can just about bet between that and your firearm, you're going to have food. And if you're fishing, that's a bonus. But you can use these for fishing as well, as one of my buddies has shown in another video, and I think I talked about in my video as well. So with just that system and a few fish hooks and maybe some sinkers, with that much gear, you know, and your firearm or your bow that you're carrying, you've guaranteed yourself, for the most part, if you can find the game, if you understand simplistic landscape tracking and sign tracking, and you can find game or you can find a water source, you pretty much guarantee yourself food. And that's the most important thing to sustainability, beyond being able to control your body core temperature, which is about survivability. Now we're beyond all of that. We can start fire, we can build shelter, we know how to keep warm. That's survivability. We're talking about sustainability, which means long-term, which means you have to have protein and fat. And the only way you're going to get all of that stuff is from animal. Okay, very simple system, doesn't weigh very much, doesn't really even cost very much, beyond the cost of the pocket hunting system. And if you went with a slingshot, you know, it would cost you less than 10 bucks. And you got $5, $6 a piece in these Conibear traps, $3 or $4 or something like that in these snares, and $3 or $4 in a frog gig, you know, for way less than 100 bucks. you got a system right here that will secure food beyond the shadow of a doubt if you can find it. Okay, real quick before we move on this video to what I think is the next important part of sustainability in your kit is I think that we need to understand that we're talking about adding things to our kit that require specialized skill and lots of dirt time to really get good at. And that's where primitive skills like making bows and arrows, making primitive traps, making primitive clothing for that matter, all of those things take lots and lots of practice. Many of them take specialized materials that you may not have on hand at the time. And many of them are not going to do the common person any good if he's stuck out somewhere for a week or two, whether it be from natural disaster or by choice or by accident. It doesn't really matter. The point is, unless you have practiced these skills extensively, it's not going to work out for you as well as a manufactured item. I can build traps all day. I can show you how to build traps all day. I can show you how to set those traps all day. But until you go out and do it and practice it and understand the subtle nuances of how to set your noose, where to set your noose, how to set up the perfect set, how to funnel the animal into that set, what to bait it with and where to bait it. All of those things are important, and unless you practice it, nobody can teach it to you, and no book can teach it to you either. So the way to avoid those things is to carry the items with you that are easier, that are a lot less brain power to try to worry about. That's the last thing you want to worry about in a situation is, man, I can't remember how Dave did that figure 4 deadfall, which Dave would never use a figure 4 deadfall. But the fact of the matter is, I'm using that for an example. You don't want to have to try to think about those things. Any 10-year-old can go out and make a 25-pound or 30-pound bow that will last for a month. It's not going to kill a deer. A 50, 60-pound bow is going to kill a deer at 15 or 20 yards, even with a marginal shot. And that's what's important to remember is when you're talking about things like bows and arrows, the Native Americans killed buffalo with bows that were 35 and 40 pounds from horses from 3 to 4 feet away, shooting right directly in the heart with bows they shot every single day of their life. They didn't go out and make a survival bow in 30 or 40 minutes out of a green piece of wood that was only 25 or 30 pounds. It was going to take string set and not be the greatest thing in the world and not be very accurate with the arrows that they made at 20 yards and go try to kill deer with it. There's a big difference there, and you have to understand that. And if you are willing to put in the dirt time to make that skill yours and you own that skill, I can make a 50-pound bow that's going to last 10 years, and I can make arrows that are going to shoot dead straight at 20 yards, and I can make broadheads for those out of stone that I know are going to kill a deer, and things of that nature. Then more power to you, because that's what I love doing myself. But everyone doesn't have that opportunity, and the way to avoid having to worry about that is to carry those manufactured items with you and be as adaptable as you can with those items. Something happened to my bow, I still have the pocket hunting system. I can shoot arrows until I can either repair or get out. And that's what's important. Same thing with the traps. Manufactured traps are, and they're more bulletproof than trying to make primitive traps. If you bait the whiskers on a 110 Conibear with anything that stinks, you're going to catch something in it sooner or later if you're anywhere around animals. That's what's important to understand. You're trying to bulletproof the system. So now, let's move on from that. And let's talk about the next thing that I think would be important to add to your kit beyond all the fluff, okay? I think the next thing is, how do I process the food now that I have it, okay? It's very simple in a short-term situation to carry a cup and a bottle, and I've got about everything I need for a 72-hour scenario. But it takes a little more than this for a longer-term sustainable situation, because I want things that I can cook in a little better than just cooking in this cup or cooking in this bottle. Like I said, this is great for short-term. For long-term, I need more than that. Just a quick side note, guys. I wanted to give you a quick historical reference for a second about cookware and things like that in general. Looking back at history, you know, one of the first items of trade with the Native Americans by the Europeans and the Spanish beyond firearms was cookpots. And if you look further ahead in history to Lewis and Clark in the 1800s, when they returned from their epic journey, the only two manufactured items that they brought back with them that they left with were their firearms and their cookpots. That tells you how important it was for long-term sustainability to have those cooking type utensils with them. This is a great system to add to something else. And what I would add to that obviously would be, first of all, some type of stove where I could get my stuff up off the coals so I could get airflow underneath it because it'll heat better that way. Very simple add-on to the system. Some type of bulletproof eating utensil. I'm not going to carve spoons and forks out in the woods if I don't have to. I'm going to have something that's bulletproof, that when I go, you know, to using it, I'm not going to break it over and over again. I don't have to fire hard, I don't have to mess with it. It doesn't weigh anything. This one's titanium. Most sporks are pretty much useless. Something that actually has fork tips on it will do you some good. Just my 2 cents on sporks. And then you're going to want some kind of pot. And if your pot is adaptable with the equipment that you have, all the better. You know, this Seagull, this MSR Seagull we've talked about a lot of times, has a lid on it that can be used for a pressure cooker. It can be used to hold food longer term. If I want to, I can wrap, you know, meat in a bandana, put it inside of it, and it will keep it protected longer term. I have a handle on this pot so that I can put it in the fire and pull it out. I also have the ability, because I have this stainless steel spreader, this fish mouth opener as they're called, with my bottle and cup, and I'll talk about that real quick for you guys. The one that we carry on our website is stainless steel. The one that you buy from Bass Pro Shops or off the internet that's black is lead-based paint. So if you're worried about that, the ones we carry are stainless steel. I can take that, and with this MSR lid, I can hook it into that lid just like this, and I now have a pan that I can cook with. So now I have a pan, I have a pot, I have a cup, and I have a bottle. Now I have a lot of combinations I can use to cook and process my food and make more than one thing at a time. If I'm frying some meat on here, cooking a stew in here, boiling my water in here and drinking it out of here, I can do all that at once and I don't have to worry about it. And for sustainability's sake, you want that. So those are just some small adaptations, you know, and showing you if I were going for a long-term type cook kit or a longer term cook kit, these are the items that I would put in there to make sure that I had that sustainability factor in my cooking. And I think that is where you need to go to add things to your kit for sustainability. It needs to be ways, now that I have food, how do I process that food? How do I cook that food? That's what's important. And then you want to be able to understand at that point the term live food never spoils, because then you want to learn how to be able to keep food alive so you don't have to process it right away. And we've talked about that in other videos as well. So this video is really meant just to talk about sustainability versus survivability. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's going to be you know, a little bit lengthy. I tried not to ramble on as much as I could. I'll get this posted as fast as I can, guys. I got a very slow connection out here, but I'm trying to get videos up for you as fast as I can on things that I think are important. I appreciate everything that you do for me. I appreciate your views. I appreciate your support, everything that you do for me, for my family, and for my school. And I'll be back with another video as soon as I can.